United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, start with meeting minutes. Have we had a chance to review?
Yeah, I've asked for a change on the 21st minutes, but I make a motion to approve the minutes for the 29th.
I second the motion for approving the Monday, October 29th, 2019 Board of Selectmen meeting minutes. Dylan, you weren't at the meeting, right?
I was not.
So, I guess I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
October 21st, you have,
Yep, I just have a memo where it says that I asked that we shorten the time on the 2 weeks of notice of the hearings. That wasn't the case. I wanted to shorten the time frame between the two hearings. I wanted 2 weeks' notice with the two hearings less than 2 weeks apart. So just correcting that portion of it and bring it back next time. I wanted to tighten up the time frame between the meetings, not eliminate the 2 week notice.
yeah. Yeah, just be a clarification there.
Mm-hmm.
Any further comments? Nope. Okay. We'll table this for edit and revisit next meeting. Okay. Any public comments? Yes, Mary Jane. Feel free to come on up if you'd like. Thank you.
I wrote a letter to the Barre Gazette. And it was about the 3 families that live around the hoops that have been put up. And there's a picture here of where the railroad tracks are and where Pine Tree Terrace is and where Nelson Street is and where I live. If you keep on going up the tracks, it's like a triangle where we live, and there's disorderly conduct going on there. There's a very bylaw about that. I agree with Greg when he said 1,000 feet isn't that difficult to walk up to the high plains. We had to do that when we were growing up, 6 years old to 12 years old. The letters that Mary Ann passed in, they were typed out by Shoddy at number 11, I found out on her computer. And I have some filled out surveys plus those letters. So there are 3 letters, and hers is the 4th one. And she was saying that she was upset when I yelled at the children for not going under my car to retrieve a ball. Now, there's a history with that. Also, he's been told to go under a truck to retrieve a ball. I don't think that that's safe. So she agreed, and I agreed, she doesn't want to speak anymore, and she didn't want the children to speak anymore, so that's taken care of, I guess. The 4th letter, well, she was the 4th letter, one of the survey letters, it was about cats, me killing cats, and pointing out antifreeze. Well, she needs to, this was number 30 Nelson Street, we'll just call her Joyce. She needs to contact the police about that 5 years ago. And animal control was not killing cats. Teenagers that didn't like the cats. She had too many. Perhaps it would be best for her to tend to her Nelson Street condo, or she'll lose it this month for non-payment of taxes. And
Mr. Chairman, I have to interrupt.
And
at
I'll
this
tend
point.
to my
Please.
Please, no.
Trafalgar Square.
This is not public comment. This should be an agenda issue. This is not a simple comment by the public.
It's not a discussion. She's speaking. We're not back and forth, so it's not an agenda item at the
She's speaking about
moment.
people's names and personal issues. that-
They've all been submitted as public records,
And if they're gonna
so
be discussed here publicly, those people have the right to know they're gonna be discussed so they can come and address it.
The town knows
this
it's in the
is
Barre
beyond
Gazette.
public
she's
comment.
setting
The town
just a
knows.
position. Let her just speak it out.
I wouldn't let
They
anyone
have
come
every right to
publicly.
come back and say something if they choose.
No one has a right to come on camera and say things about someone else that's not been notified prior to a meeting.
Actually, they
It's
do.
in the
It's called the
Barre
First
Gazette.
Amendment. We may have to pay attention. She's just part of the public. She's just stating her statement. I'm just gonna let her talk, Greg, for a few moments,
It's
be
in the
done
Barre
with it, and we'll
Gazette.
move on.
Everybody knows it. It's in the Barre Gazette.
My objection is noted.
Thanks.
Please officially.
I'll tend to
announce.
my house as best I can. And if we have debris and junk, it's by the, you walk up the tracks, and that's where the drug people are. And there's a big storage bin there. And there's a Nelson Street and a Trafalgar Square parking lot, and that's where you have spoons that are broken for their drugs, and bottles and jars, and should be tended to. My minute's up. Just more smear campaign they have to put up with.
I appreciate you taking the time to give us a different side of some of the letters that you submitted. Thank you.
You can keep those. He can-
Yes, Sam?
At the last meeting, you suggested or directed, or whatever the word may be, that this coming meeting, or this meeting, we were gonna discuss Fire Chief Joe Rogowski appreciation, and if I remember correctly, you said, let's put it on the next agenda. Did we miss something, or is it gonna be scheduled for the following agenda?
Neither, I believe, because during that discussion, it got brought up that they put his name on the side of the new fire truck. And so we didn't think we needed to put it on the agenda to continue the discussion. Because that was brought up briefly during our discussion about whether an agenda item should be brought up. And since a decision had already been made and his name had already been on the fire truck,
So is that it? Is that it? But
that's it for now.
it's not dropped.
I don't know what it is.
Well, that's a good question. I mean,
It's not an agenda item at this moment. He's not retired yet. He's still a part-time worker. So there's a part of us where we're not rushing to do something else on top of just putting his name on the side of the truck. I'm not saying that we won't talk about it, but
I was wondering.
I've had different impressions as to how much he would truly appreciate constant public talk about things like that.
No, I just know that other.
No, he's just humble. He doesn't like us doing a lot of talking
No, but other people
about it.
who've worked their whole life for a town, not necessarily this town, but a town, have been appreciated more outwardly rather than what's happening here. So I thought we were gonna have a discussion. That's one of the reasons I came tonight, but if we're not going to have one, then I guess that's your call.
Is this something we believe we should put on a future agenda at this time? I'm looking for input from you two because I don't want to be the sole person talking about agenda items.
Well, I clearly agree with Sam that former Chief Rogowski has given substantial years to this town dedicated. Has lived in town and stayed in town since his birth. His dedication to the fire department is above and beyond anyone else's. He still makes calls even at night at this time. But on the same hand, absolutely, he doesn't like public recognition. You know, it's a tightrope. I think he deserves to be recognized, and I think he would appreciate being recognized. But I don't think he would appreciate being a public spectacle in the process. So walk that tightrope as you will, but that's a fact. He certainly deserves recognition for what he's done and how long he's served this town. And I think that acknowledgement would be deeply appreciated. Deeply. However, not a big fan of being put up on a pedestal for people to come look at and adore.
And that's the two sides of the issue, is yes, I completely agree with Greg on my opinion, with the opinion that it's well-deserved. And I do expect that the town will be, that won't be the last thing the town ever did for Joe, is putting his name on the side of a fire engine. But I also don't think he necessarily appreciates the planning of an event at a public meeting for him too much. I'm not saying that it won't happen, but I do think maybe some of that planning will actually be done and then brought to us to make a recommendation rather than talking about it. But I'm not 100% sure. I think it's something that I personally would like to reach out to other people to find out what they want to do and then see if they want to bring something to the table because they know him better than me. I think he deserves the appreciation, but I wouldn't even know what to recommend that he would feel the appreciation the best, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think it's.
So I don't disagree with you at all,
I think
Sam,
that's
about
logical,
giving him
yeah.
that. I just don't know the best way to go about getting to that point because I don't think he really likes
He often-
constant public meeting talk about.
He often watches these meetings, and he'd be uncomfortable having us discuss it, I would believe, at the meetings.
But don't know what your thoughts are either, if you have any on this.
No comment.
So what I think, Sam, is at some point it probably will end up on an agenda item. But my guess is when it does, it's likely gonna be us just saying, yes, we agree with the plan, let's go forward, not figuring out how to do it. That's just my guess.
Thanks.
If you have interest in being involved or you have thoughts, I would just suggest outside of the meeting, just present some thoughts to Andrew. And Andrew may already be talking to others or may be aware that others have similar thoughts. And
And he could share those thoughts with us.
right, and then when a real idea is ready, then he can kind of present something to
I
us.
had thought that those in the fire department themselves may be considering something that I'm not aware of.
Not that I'm aware of at this point.
I was just following up from the last meeting we had.
I got you, and I'm sorry if
Okay.
either one, I miscommunicated, or two, I didn't properly follow up, because I didn't get it on the agenda, and I apologize with the
Alright.
follow-up on that item.
That's fine.
Any further discussion? Any more public comment? Okay, let's move on to the next. We'll move right into The financial policies and procedures, we got 3 more sections: financial reserves, forecasting, and investments. I'd like to start with financial reserves. Open the floor to thoughts, comments, questions.
Not as of yet.
Not at this time.
Okay. Andrew, one thing I thought I recall is we have had discussions, I think, regarding stabilization fund, and I thought, and I'm not saying we're there yet, or it's not something we're still looking to pursue, but you had mentioned having like a stabilization fund that's really the one intended for the minimum 5%, the emergency one, and then potentially another one that's more specific for capital.
Capital stabilization fund.
Yeah, so I think that's the overall goal, is to get to the point where we can establish and begin to fund that type of stabilization fund. The difficult part is getting yourself to a position where it doesn't just make sense to pull it right from your free cash and stabilization to fund. Because I mean, right now we're just getting to that point where we're basically using that free cash balance to fund what our capital needs are, and it's just because we have such a big backlog of needs that we're trying to address all at once. But like, one thing I was talking today with Chief Rogowski about, our pending needs with replacement of the ambulance, and one of the thoughts that we had was if we set a lower cap threshold on what our projected ambulance receipts were annually, and and said that, all right, the next time that when we have to purchase the replacement for A2, we fund it from free cash, but we lower that threshold on what we're anticipating for receipts. Whatever comes in above that number, putting into a stabilization or into an ambulance replacement stabilization fund, and the thought is that by the time that fund builds up enough, we'll have enough in there to at least fund 75% of the replacement for A1, which is about 3 years away.
Is that an ethical practice, intentionally under-target our receipts just to pad it up? Or are we supposed to make a real estimate of our receipts?
I mean, the real estimate can be low. I mean, when I'm not saying, bringing it from 400,000 to 300,000.
The same could be done by just saying, we're just not gonna use 10% of that money and put it into free cash and save
We
it.
could do that as
And
well.
budgeting.
Right.
Rather than, I worry if we start playing games with putting fictitious numbers out that we know are not true, it skews everything, and I'd rather.
The general thought is what we're using to offset the operational costs versus what we're deviating to capital. So right now, what we're essentially doing is taking 100% of what we're anticipating for ambulance revenue and putting right into operations. If we change that formula a little bit and said that up to a certain amount we're putting toward operations and a specific amount is going toward capital replacement, that's more of what we're doing rather than.
Why don't we establish a policy that states that a certain percentage of the anticipated receipts will go to the operating budget and a certain percentage will be set as, rather than skew the number,
Right.
just state that a certain percentage of that will be set aside into that account.
The other thing is that every year
And
might be a
inform a
different,
policy.
I mean, every year might be a little different, so we might be.
But if
it might
it's the
take
same
some- It might take
percentage.
some work, it might take some working with to
But if
figure
it's
out
the
what
same
the
percentage, at least we do it on a
is.
consistent basis without fudging a number every year.
Rather than a flat number, maybe look at a percentage.
Right, we could.
And
see-
now it's not based even on anticipated, it's based on actual revenues. This percentage will go in because those revenues are intended to pay for the next year's operating budget.
Because what happened this year was that we had, we projected at 425 for the number, and we ended up with a really healthy final month of collections. So we still budgeted low to know that we're going to at least hit that target, but we actually ended up about $25,000 higher than what we thought that we were gonna be taking in,
So we have
so.
a 3-year average on that we've been looking at?
That number has been, the number of our ambulance receipts has been climbing because of the changes in operations and covering those costs. So over the last 3 years, we've gone from taking in 325,000 to 440,000.
But we've only been under the fire department with the ambulance.
For 2
No, I
years.
meant more the,
Not quite 3, but I'm saying.
Right, but that's that
How-
We're not
3-year
starting our third
projection.
year, yeah.
the number between our anticipated receipts versus our actual receipts.
Has
That
almost been right
difference?
on. Has almost been right on. It's been within
So-
5,000.
See, because that's the number I'm saying. 5,000 is approximately
8%.
1%
Right.
of
Yeah.
actual
That's fine.
receipts.
Oh, 500,000.
Yeah,
Okay.
500.
And I know it's not 1%, I'm just,
No, no,
we're closer to 1%. Maybe that's just it,
I should
is
have
part of
said
this
0.8%.
reserve
Yeah,
would say
8%.
is 1% of receipts will go towards an ambulance capital
Yeah.
account.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's for the ambulance or whatever else, that, it does allow a little freedom, so don't lock it in just on the
Yeah, but
ambulance if it's
that's-
a capital account.
That's not gonna replace an ambulance in 5 years. That's the thing. We're looking at a
No, but it can be
$400,000
used to
expense.
reduce.
Yeah, but if the idea is to take the hit off the budget all at once, we really need to get a substantial, like $100,000 a year set aside.
But that problem there means we're putting $100,000 on the rest of the general fund to fill in the gap.
Yeah, that's gonna be the issue,
Right,
is that
but-
whatever you're
And-
taking off the top, you're having to fill that back in with.
The benefit of the
Tax
way
work.
we started investing in this department in the last few years is we've actually reduced the general fund's contribution because we
Right.
increased collections to make up the difference. So the
Right.
gap started getting
And we
tighter.
actually increased investment with man-hours to fill up those shifts under the chief's recommendations, and it has worked.
But it's gonna reach
It's-
a
yeah.
peak at some
Right.
point.
Depending what happens with OCAM and other things as well, that's gonna open up another whole can of worms if we get into that. Hopefully beneficial to us, but ever-changing game, so.
Well, that was one thought. And the other thought was similarly with free cash, do we want to put into this policy a similar thing? 1% of free cash will always go towards a capital stabilization fund, not the general minimum 5% stabilization fund required by law or recommended by law.
Right.
I wonder if at this.
And I'm just curious, the thoughts on,
What if at this point, we're not better just trying to, any extra money, bolster our stabilization to 10% instead of 5? And when we reach that point, split it off and form the other stabilization account. Take half from stabilization, drop it back to 5% and establish the capital stabilization in one swoop. Add it to the stabilization account for now. Everything extra we can is try, make an attempt to build that to 10%. And when it's that healthy, then we can maybe not take all, but take 3 million out and start,
I hear you, but I think,
3 million. Yeah.
Yeah, 300,000.
I'm just, my numbers are not good tonight,
Sorry.
folks. I'm sorry.
from
Listen
my
to 'em about-
perspective, by setting up a separate capital stabilization, we're saying that money can only be used for capital. It
Right.
cannot supplement a rough year of revenue and
Right.
thus an operational budget issue.
But the
And
stabilization.
if you just continue to build it in the existing stabilization, you have no regulation on how that other 5% can be
Well,
spent.
that's the idea. The stabilization can be.
And that's all I meant by writing it in like that. That's locked in for capital.
But I'm
It's
saying the
not an emergency
stabilization-
fund anymore.
Stabilization keeps it open for anything, including using it for capital. I'm saying, rather than trying to build 2 different accounts, build that one up. And then you'd be dumping, if you put over 300,000 or 200,000 all at once, you just establish an account with some real teeth in it. And then it gets split off and is designated to capital, but.
Yeah, I think that's.
Until then, it can always be used for capital. And we don't intend to use it for anything else. I mean, that's not the idea, to build it up and spend it. The policy says that we'll spend maximum of a third of those things and try to keep any expenditures.
Only if it's below the 5%, does it say a maximum of a third?
Well, if we start bumping
In
the
other words,
percentage.
if you're getting tight and you have to use it, you can't use more than a third if you get below that 5. That's how I read it. Was that?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
If you go below 5, you can only use a third of what's in there to expend it, so you can't. If we have to go below 5%, we spend 1/3 maximum. And we can play with that too, if we bring that percentage up and make the target 7 or 8%, and then say, we still only have a maximum of 1/3 we would spend, period. You know what I mean? So not a third below 5, but only a third period, to make sure we keep the balance up there. And make a serious effort. I mean, I'm still optimistic that some of these marijuana grow fields will help in this with stabilization accounts in the future, maybe help get rid of some debt, and then let us bolster those accounts, which would change the way we buy things in this town completely. But that's gonna play itself out and see where it goes. I mean, that could throw a curveball into all these financing ideas. Depending what happens when these facilities are up and running in the next couple of years, we really don't know how it's gonna impact us, and it could be significant.
And I mean, that's what I think that we are right now, is just trying to bolster what we have for a stabilization fund and working off of that. But once we can kind of get it where it's really independent and we can kind of break some of that money, we know that we're not gonna need that additional capital amount for stabilization in the case of a lean year. Then we can start to look at breaking it off. So.
Even if we get to 6 or 7%, we could dump that full 1 or 2% to start the other account. We don't have to wait till
Well,
it's at
is
10.
that something we wanna write in here, is when we can write into this, that when the stabilization fund
Hit 6%.
meets 6 or 7%
We
of
break
the
off
budget,
two. Yep. We
1% of that will be put into it. You know, in other words,
That's reasonable. Every time it hits 7, we
because then
drop
we just
1%
put it in
back
and we were kind of saying, all right, we agree that this is the way we should deal with our finances moving forward. So we just put it in now. We don't wait to revise the policy later. We just address it when the time gets there and the funds reach that level to start building this other account. I'm just curious.
And then we have
And I
to
know it could
decide.
tie you up,
Yeah.
or the finance committee, it could feel like they get tied up.
Yeah.
But if you're at a point where you can say you got a healthy 6 or 7% in your stabilization, and the next free cash says, well, if we put it all in there, we're at 8%. Well, that 1% between 7 and 8 will actually go to this other account, and it'll start building the capital. So you're no longer looking at stabilization when any department, I mean, the building department got lucky with the electric vehicle, but now the fire department's inspector's vehicle is pretty much dead, which was the building department's vehicle. I mean, we got the most out of that we were gonna get. We're talking about the big items like the ambulances and the police cruisers and all that, but we still gotta be able to pick up a $30,000
And building
Blazer or
maintenance.
something for the inspector to get around town again.
Capital can mean building maintenance and repair as well.
Right. Exactly.
So that's all I mean, it's,
Well, that's the next thing to talk, when we build the account, do we use it for payments on bonds or on notes for, it? Do we try to save that account up to the point that it can make one of these purchases? If we are, then that's gonna be almost like a revolving account, it's gonna,
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea, is to build this to the point where we're paying for things in full rather than bonding them out for long term, so that we're not incurring the interest costs.
Yeah.
You know, that we are gonna have the certain things that are gonna, you know, we are gonna have to bond out, but, you know, rather than, like we did a couple of years ago, when taking out a bond on 8 pieces of equipment and having to pay that off over 10 years, you know, being able to pull that money right out front rather than spending, you know, a couple $1,000s a year in interest, so.
yeah.
then you can put the money back into stabilization if you do like the same payments and build that back up in, you know, 80% of the time and 90% of the time, save some money.
But I do know
We would have to go back to paying it back.
what was it 2015, 2016? We were at that point where it's like, we were living off of stabilization, so we're still picking at it just on operational stuff. We were close, or the free cash was constantly, we didn't even know what our free cash number was, but when it finally came in, it was like, all right, that did cover the budget we approved. I mean, right up to in the last 3 years, I think we've progressively gotten better at predicting, planning, and the revenues have come in better, so it hasn't been, I don't wanna say not as tight. Claire, obviously, with the finance committee, would be able to say a lot more about the budgeting process and whether you're more comfortable with our finances today than you were 3 years ago. But I feel better about it, but maybe I don't have the same perspective. I mean,
I
you,
think it's improved.
okay. So
We're heading in the right direction.
The goal is to tax what you spend and make it tight, but it's been, yeah. beyond tight, where we're cutting and where we're finding money in the past, and I don't think that's been such a big issue the last year or two, and hopefully less in the
Could you
future.
grab that laptop that's,
It's up on the cabinet.
yeah.
That was all. So I was thinking under stabilization fund paragraph B, you might break it into B1 and B2.
Yeah.
B2 would be just describing how we'll invest in a capital stabilization fund once the main stabilization fund meets a certain minimum.
Yeah. I just have her grab the laptop because with that new software program I was showing you guys, I already have the revenue projections for FY21 all set, and I'll just be able to kind of give you guys a quick, just while we're talking about it, give you
Okay.
guys a quick overview on.
So maybe instead of putting it necessarily accounting, but just saying that the policy that shall be in the future to set up, just make a note that we're gonna establish in the future, like our forecasting of it, rather than say we're gonna have it for sure right now.
Yeah, but you don't
Like
really
to
approve
acknowledge
a
it.
policy that says you're gonna write a policy in the future.
Well, then I
that's
think we do.
draft that just sits on the side because we've been talking about this for a few years now, so it's writing in here saying that we're talking about it is kind of the same thing. It's not really doing anything, and I thought,
But
can we not determine a level that says, okay, anything above this will go to? And then future boards can come in and rewrite this if they feel the
We could do
need.
it that way. We're gonna put something in, I'd like it to be in and effective, not, in something we can do. And if it's gonna be projection that we add money once we get to a certain point, I'd be comfortable with that.
Yeah, I mean, if
Well,
you
that's more what I'm
If we
saying, is
establish
like,
it, then-
once,
I don't wanna say we're gonna establish it and have no time frame to do it, or method that we're gonna do it.
Yeah, I would almost establish a baseline more like 10% to say that you're, or for stabilization, say if you've reached that 10% threshold, you're gonna push that over into a different stabilization, or a capital stabilization fund. Or that you're gonna always require yourself to do that.
Maybe push 3 or 4 of it, but keep it at least 6. I mean, I'd love to be above 5, I'd love to be
Yeah,
above the
we're,
minimum before we do
I
that.
think we're at about 6 right now, anyway, so.
I
And that's
used to-
prior to free cash, so.
I mean, I'd rather see that get to 10 in someday, but.
yes, Claire.
You don't want to write something into this policy that's gonna bind you, so that if you can't do it, if things got really bad, and you've got something written in here, you're saying you're gonna put so much percent into an account, but you can't do it some year.
That's
And
why
that's-
Andrew's recommending
You gotta
10%
be very
level
careful
first.
about that, you don't wanna back yourself in a corner and then not be able to operate.
I agree, and so what my proposal is when what we consider the traditional stabilization fund reaches,
10.
and I'm willing to accept what they said, 10% of your budget. And so, doesn't matter what fiscal year, as the budget grows, that 10% grows. But once it reaches 10%,
Proposed move 1 or 2.
we no longer will add money to that stabilization fund in a budget year at annual town meeting. We will add money to a new capital stabilization fund, the balance that we don't keep in free cash. And what that means is we still know we got that comfortable 10% emergency fund, and we're not gonna, if it goes down to 9%, money goes into that to bring it to 10% before it goes back into, the overflow goes into the capital. So that's
I like that, so.
kind of keeping that, the percentages make it easier than flat numbers, because now you're right, now you're just stuck like,
Yeah,
well, we
so
don't
it's-
have 15,000 this year, but the policy says we have to.
So instead of saying we're gonna take the overage out and move it, once we achieve 10, we'll stop adding and add to the other account. I like that a lot.
It's more like an overflow,
I like that.
right.
I like that a lot better. That way we can establish the account, we have a definition of when it starts getting money in it, and how it will come in. Doesn't mean we couldn't move more if we wanted to in the future if there's a good year, but it means generally we stick to 10, then anything excess goes. We
And
have
by-
no requirement to move it.
Putting it in the policy, we also give something for the finance committee to look at and how they budget things to say, all right, how many years would it take us to
And-
get to that point?
And a target
You
for
know,
that.
if we want to get to 10% in 5 years, let's budget that way.
Yeah.
And then in 6 years, we're actually building this capital plan. I'm it's just something to work with, because it is written in the policy, you know, that was kind of the, and I'm not 100% sure, I know we're reviewing on this, but what role do we throw this at the finance committee to get input from them? Just as a neighborly thing, because I don't
We
think
could
it's
do-
really
we
their
could just-
jurisdiction,
I mean,
but.
we can just, we have a meeting next Thursday, so if you want to table this, we can talk about it
Gone
then.
through it.
Well, at least we'll get that change made before we vote on that section anyways. Then you get their opinion on it.
Right.
But then too, a good thing would be determining a goal, like we're saying now our goal is gonna be 10% in the stabilization. Finance could help come up with a goal for what we want for a number in capital stabilization. What should we shoot for? You'd have to look at what we've done, traditional purchases, what our forecasts are and people's wish lists and our 5-year plan. Look at the totality of what we're gonna have to try to budget over the next 5 years and see what kind of level we should try to target in that account as well.
Yeah.
Because it's not gonna happen for a few years to get to that target level, but we should be able to come up with a number that we wanna get to in there as well, with some rationale behind it, not just an arbitrary number we pick. That's all. Be silly if we get $1 million built up, then we turn out, $500,000 we find, it does any one purchase, it's all we need. We don't wanna overdo it either, and, people would rather have us cut taxes and save money than take excess and put it someplace we don't need it. But we need to get it healthy and keep it healthy too, so.
Connected. Oh, he's got Microsoft Edge.
So, this basically gives us a full overview of what we're looking at for our FY '21 budget process. So everything down to taxes, charges, licenses, fines, forfeitures, projected state aid, other revenue, and transfers comes into this total revenue, which would go up about $371,000 or 3.18% from what the prior year's budgeted total is. And that's using basically the full amount of what our new growth would be, right to the tax levy limit, and then for each.
Taking a full 2.5?
That would be a full this would be a full 2.5, would put us at 12 million, just over $12 million. So this is how that all breaks down, and, the property tax is the big one, and this shows our amount over, since 2012, how our property tax levy has gone up. The one number that's missing is 2020, but once the recap is filed, that number will be filled in. But you can see, like,
Is that the end of the month?
this would be the end of it. It's been filed, it's just,
Oh.
once the recap is filed, we take those numbers, plug them into SoftWrite, we get an Excel kick out of that, and I send it over to these guys, they plug in the numbers, and that just carries it in, so we're just a few weeks till those numbers are in. You can see, like, for licenses and permits, how we're projecting at 2021, and, state aid doesn't change that much. We're trying to keep everything basically in line year after year with most of this stuff. So that gives us that total, revenue figure of about 12 million. You can see just how it progressed, and then if I come down to close revenue down.
Did you actually reduce other revenue by 100,000 from
So-
FY19 to FY21?
From FY19,
That's what it looks like.
which one? Do you
Other
see?
revenue.
So other revenue, it'll say exactly what I.
Yeah, you
what
had
broke-
273,000 FY19 and you got
Mhm.
102 on FY21.
Right, so the big impact on that is this $150,000 that we received out of the bond collector that $150,000 we got from the Langileer bond. is
Right, but
projected
the
right
reason
there.
I'm curious is because FY '21, are we not expecting CPC to make their first payment to the town?
The only problem is, do we know if that's $0 or $1 million? We don't really have a projected number that we can use.
They submitted a projected number.
But do we want to use that when anticipate?
We have to have
But
some,
do we-
otherwise we're completely ignoring a host community agreement contract and the fact that they have all of the permits done.
Well, they did
So
their
they're in
first-
business.
But I guess
They did their first grow, so their projected number should be very accurate. They should know.
Well, I'm even okay if they said we're gonna make 80,000 or 90,000 and we say 40,000.
if we
We've
take
gotta
that in-
put a number
right.
in or we're not really,
But if we end up getting that number as unanticipated revenue, that'll just lower the tax, that will lower our tax burden if we use 0 as the number that we go in with. It's almost like, do we
no,
really want to
the
count
tax
on?
burden goes up if you underestimate your revenue.
But do we want to count on that? Do we want to count on that revenue, or do we want to see where it comes in for the first year and then judge it based
I'd count on,
that?
like Matt said, half his projection. I don't wanna, I'd rather not hit the 2.5% if we don't have to either. I mean, I'd rather stay under the tax levy limit.
Right.
I mean.
It gives you wiggle room if you need it as well.
Right.
It's possible they're gonna have revenue before the end of this fiscal year
Mhm.
and have something to pay us.
Right.
Um,
Well, in that case, I mean, this is.
So I'm just
November-
curious.
I mean, this is November projections for something that's not going to be done.
And
until
no, I'm
June
not trying to say you
anyway.
did bad, it
Yeah.
was just something as we continue to move forward,
Just something-
just
not something
something to
discussing,
talk
that's all.
about.
Yeah,
That's all.
We're just trying to stay.
Let's be clear, I love this. That lays that out very clearly. I like how it's done. It's gonna make the process, Claire's probably liking it. It's gonna make things easier, I think, to go through the budget process, to have everything spelled out all ahead of time and be able to go back and,
Yeah, you know exactly
Reference
what,
it.
what we're gonna use as revenue figures, so we can even debate that within the finance
Plus, you
committee.
don't really, this is all estimating,
It's all estimated, yeah, but you have to build your budget based off your estimated
and
revenues.
you never know.
right,
What's
Yeah.
right. Well, it's always an estimate, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
we're projecting what we're gonna get in taxes this year, and what we're gonna have in expenses.
And I do completely agree, like, we really don't know yet until they go through a whole cycle and they sell, they make money, and then they tell us, this would be CPC Iandoli's on,
Right.
off Vernon.
I think he's got a good handle on what he's gonna do, as long as he gets this inside portion going. That seems, from talking to him, that the inside is, 5 cycles, a 10-week cycle, 5 grows, and it's gonna be very precise what he produces inside. in-
Oh, I gotcha.
in the
Not as
rates.
relying on weather and
Right, the
potential.
outside,
Yeah.
what I asked him how he's figuring his outside, he's figuring the poundage you can grow outside, and figuring every other year is a wash, you get nothing, the crop gets ruined for whatever acts of nature, strong winds, hail, whatever else, drowning rains.
Locusts, I don't know.
Yeah, who knows, so he's figuring he's figuring a full sale and a 0 sale, so he's averaging that half, so I think his predictions are gonna be very reasonable. They could be a little too low some years if he has a good product outside, and they could be a little too high, his prediction, when the year that he gets beat up outside. But the inside portion should be consistent.
Yeah, so like, just as we're going through the expenditure here, I use, like for Quabbin assessment, obviously that's gonna be the biggest question mark that we're gonna have in this
Always
entire
is.
budget. So, we can see back from 2012, we went from, $4 million that we were contributing all the way up to 5.6. And it's a little bit less because we ended up approving a higher number than what the actual assessment was, but, we'll build off that 5.6. So the average increase per year has been 3.7. So when we start that preliminary budget figure, plug in the 3.7 so that we know that that was the 8-year average of what our increases have been, even if it's higher or lower.
We do know, though, that that's gonna be much bigger next year, right? Because we're the town that's going through the assessor's reassessment, so the town valuation goes up, which means we'll have to deal with what Hubbardson just dealt with, and not knowing how the school's gonna hit us with a 10% increase, even though it's really a 5% increase.
So this is where we can play with a couple numbers here. So let's just look at, with that number in place, we're at a projected revenue, or projected deficit of $32,000. And that was just kind of plugging in some known figures with that 3.7%, but let's just say we get hit with a 7% increase like they did. That puts us at a $220,000 deficit.
Yeah.
So at least this will make it easier for us to kind of put those numbers in front of them and say, this is how your numbers are affecting our budget.
Do you know how they made out the superintendents that were petitioning the legislature to try to get them to rewrite these school allocations and how they figure the monies, especially the transportation? Did they get anywhere with that?
I think they got additional funding in the closeout budget for transportation, but I don't think that there's been any major overhaul
I think
changes
there
to
was
the
no
calculation.
year-to-year change. It was just this year,
So
we'll
we
give
still
you a
need
little
to-
extra if you need it, but
So we
they're too
still-
busy rebuilding MBTA for Boston.
Yeah, for billions. 1
Yes, put that on the record.
1.6
send it
to
the
22
governor.
billion are the different estimates. 1.6 billion or 1.9 billion for the low estimate and 22 billion for the high estimate. That's a big swing in billions.
But, yeah, so that, but you can see like the Monty Tech assessment, how we got whacked last year versus every other year, how it's kind of been that slow up and down, and then bang, we got hit with 446,000. I don't know how that number's gonna go next year, so I just basically held that at 2% increase for now. I have training with the department heads on Wednesday for how they can implement. So once I hit save, I can send this whole projected number out to all the department heads, and they can go and plug in their own numbers right into it, send them right back to us. And then as between us and the finance committee, we can go and say approved, not approved, modified, and at any time the department head can log in and see where they are in the process and whether or not we need additional information, or if we're gonna knock a number down and why we're doing it.
Gotcha. So what do you have the Quabbin assessment at now, 3 something?
So I brought that back down to the 3.7 that we had before, just to keep it in line.
Let's
with
put it
our
right down
budget.
at 2.5.
Say what, 2.5?
That's what I'm hoping for. Every year I ask.
Hey,
I'll keep asking.
2.5.
They've,
got
and admittedly,
an
they've done
excess,
well in the
right?
last few years. They have been nice to us in the last couple of years, and they've tried to work with us. Some
Drop
kicking
that
and screaming with our
1%.
arguing, but they have really
The
made an effort. so.
2.5 gets us a $35,000 surplus.
We can finally
So-
buy that
so if
used
it's- so
laser
if
for the
it's-
fire inspector.
So if it's 3.25%, that would hit the target right now. So
Right.
it'd be nice if we can stick in that 2.5 to 3% range.
Yep.
And we hope they're listening.
Yeah, so, new toy to play with, and hopefully it makes things a little bit more clear as we go
Appreciate it.
forward here.
Well, I think we're
Seems
trying to
nice
get,
for you guys, because you
Yeah.
can just do those numbers right in front of you. You can kind of get a better,
what we're trying to impress to
Easier
the
to
school
just
system last year, I think, was that
see how that
if the
tweak
town
makes
gets
it easy to
healthier and the
see.
budget gets healthier, our home values go up, people wanna move here, and that helps the school district. So it's not just cutting their budget now, it's gonna help their budget later. If our budget gets healthier right now, and these towns get a little healthier, because we're literally all in this together, so I'm hoping they can tighten up where they can and keep it down for us, and then hopefully in a few years, this will turn around completely, and everybody will be happy.
Yeah. So,
Well,
yeah, it's nice
the
to.
school committee does have a little bit of say in this, if you guys are interested. Please ask them, not us.
But,
I'm
it's
not
nice that I can
saying
go-
they're wrong. I'm not saying they need to change. I'm saying they're the ones that can change it if you feel it needs to be done.
Yeah, they're just showing what's nice. We can also show the five years out where we're projected to be on every single major category too, so based off of our last 8 years.
So this is our budget, right?
Right, this is our budget as we're going through it, so it's forecasting out every line item based off the last 8 years, what that total amount, so if I did total expenditures, by 2027 at our current rate, we're looking at a $15 million budget.
Mhm. Which means stabilization at 10% would have to be 1.5 million at that point. Can we get to 1.5 million in 8 years?
Right.
If we're gonna grow like that, we gotta see if we can. We gotta see if the plan will allow for it, which is, I mean, that's the goal. That's why we set it in here, to kinda say, let's see if we can make it happen.
Well, that's the part of looking ahead this many years too, is you get an idea. Don't just think like, oh, we just need 13 million in a couple of years. No, we need 15 million. That's a big difference.
So, anyway.
Thank you very
That's
much,
that.
I appreciate that, it helps provide a perspective. So, unless anybody else has anything, that was my only financial reserves comment, was just building in that language to create
Yeah,
the
I
capital
like the idea to say
stabilization
that
fund.
anything over 10% of the stabilization will then be diverted to the capital stabilization. So we'll establish it and divert anything over 10% into it. Or any monies as we see fit going along, we can always add to it. We don't have to even say that, but
Right.
we can always add to a stabilization fund.
Any other questions on the financial reserves? None. All right, the next one is forecasting. As you can see, he gave a little bit of a projection on some of the things they're doing in regards to the policy. And we kind of did a little talking about different. So, anybody have any comments on this?
The only one I had was on the investment side so far.
Would we have a motion on accepting the forecasting section of the policy?
Certainly, I move that we accept the forecasting portion of the policy.
Do I have a second?
I second that we move forward with this.
Any further discussion? It's not overly in-depth, it's only a couple pages, but it generally kind of provides the guidelines on how we forecast revenues and expenditures to plan for our budget. And I'll call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Next section, investments. Anybody have any comments or thoughts on investments?
I do. In the investments, under the instrument types, I just don't like the number for common and preferred stock investment, 250,000, that's, you know, as it would stand now, that would be half the stabilization account. And that's a hefty amount of put all your eggs in one basket type of thing, I just, uncomfortable with that larger number.
Number again, 27, or
Page 17. You could do something to break it down, or 250,000 with a maximum of so many in a certain type of stock or something, or a certain, you know, portfolio. The thought that the $250,000 could all go into one portfolio or one place that's half our money. That's just, nobody would invest half their money in one
I
thing.
think, well, I read this differently. What I think is they're saying that all of your long-term investments, whether it's that row of common
Yeah.
preferred stock, money market, if the total amount of all of that is in 250,000, then you cannot spend any of it in stocks. In other words, you've got to focus on money market and other options before you put into stocks, unless you have at least 250,000 to invest in long-term. If you get 250,000 in long-term, maybe you can throw 10,000 in stocks and put the other 240,000 in maybe a little bit safer, more reliable long-term
Okay,
investment.
So it's not the $250,000 just for the stocks, it's, okay. That's,
It's like you can't play
Reading it
stocks
the wrong
until you
way.
have more money in the bank, is what I think is
Right,
kind of
yeah,
what it's
it's-
saying.
that's exactly what my concern was,
Yeah.
so, okay, never mind, then good. I read that
Yeah,
wrong. That was
Trying to say-
exactly my concern for it, geez, that's the last place you
I
wanna
read it
go.
like you too at first.
The
And then
last
it,
place you
like,
wanna
my
go.
mind circled back to the word aggregate, and then I was like,
right.
Okay, I got you,
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah. Plus all this is in place
Long-term, not
first, you can't
aggregate
play
stock.
All right, that's made my hair stand out. Ooh. That's a risk with that much. So you gotta have half it invested solidly before you can play with stocks.
I believe it's, I think this is a well-thought-out plan. It does not put the town at risk of
No.
spending too much money on risky investments. It is really based on kind of your standard low return, but long-term, it's safe.
And all accredited type of investments as well.
Right.
And insured and deemed safe. So lower yield, but safe.
Right.
So I like that.
And outside of our stabilization fund, we don't really have much investment money. I'm not saying that we don't have any, you know, other than your standard bank accounts and some CDs you can rotate so that, you know, it meets your cash flow. But that's why most of our money is going into kind of these lower risk, more liquid, use it when we need it, but if we can, we'll gain a little bit. At least that way you're not losing money by not investing. You know, if you actually, if you put money on under your pillow, in 5 years, it's worth less than if we're not doing that. But when you're talking about the responsibility of the town's money, you gotta be careful and you can't. And I think we did a good job balancing, allowing a certain amount, again, once we have 250,000, we could make some things that might be, this looks like the right investment. Generally, when we do that anyway, we're using consultants to help guide us in that discussion, if I'm correct.
Yeah, and they get a copy of this too, so they know what, you know, any financial advisor knows what our policies are and won't operate outside of those. Similar to like when we got the one for the OPEB on how they, you know, almost like they're almost like, we want the town to establish these policies, so that way it sets us that we're not gonna go outside of these parameters. So they actually like it when we have these, so that way they go, okay, this is the this is the rules of the game. We know how to play with your money.
Rules of engagement.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion that we approve the investing portion of the financial documents here.
I'll second that motion.
Any further discussion, questions, comments? Yes, Sam?
I'm just having some, I happen to see Cynthia Henshaw from the East Quadrant Land Trust at the planning meeting the other evening, and we were just generally talking, and we had a joint common thought process about that the school over here has no solar on the roof, when many other towns are utilizing those flat roofs for solar. And she even mentioned that the Quabbin Regional School District has such an abundance of open land. And I've been reading all over that towns are trying to link up with solar to limit the liability, the costs. And she mentioned that Barre has nothing. Barre has some individual facilities, but there's no thought of anything utilizing the open spaces that we currently have on schools. And I didn't know why there was always a difficulty getting to that focus.
I can answer half that question. School committee and superintendent deal with Quabbin Middle School and High School and all the lands there. The town of Barre has no choice whether they put solar on or not.
Zero say.
But we do capital investments on Ruggles Lane, so that would be on us. The town of Barre, the Board of Selectmen, working with the town administrator.
And of course, the public safety building as well.
Yes.
But even at the Ruggles, wouldn't we need consent from the school because they lease the building from us? So it's still not totally our say on it.
I don't know how that works. Usually they make recommendations, but I think we just determine it, and they just have to manage it after. So depending on how say if we got into a contract, or if we bought and installed, however, if we bought and owned it, usually you can accomplish that because you can bond it out based on the offset in the electric bill.
Right.
I understand, though, that you've really got to understand the net budget rules for schools in order to get the money back from the school district to pay for the bond that the town put up. Because I think solar actually is the exception, but outside of that, like if we did a lighting upgrade there and the town paid for it, we wouldn't get money back for the reduced electric bill.
Right.
Because
We
they
just
have
sa-
their
we just
minimum
saved that
net
money.
spending they have to meet, and wherever they put it, but they'll just take it from what was the electric account and put it into another thing that they believe they need to spend money on, and they've been short on. And I'm not saying that's wrong, I'm just saying there's rules that limit how a town can invest in a school property and whether they can adjust the operating budget because of it or not. If we went into a contract relationship with someone, power purchase agreement or leasing the roof or whatever these rules are, different story, but that doesn't mean it's still not gonna affect our building, and then we just really need to make sure that how we review that contract language and make sure that we're protected with whatever they do is a different. So, I'm just saying that I'm a little bit familiar with this, but those are the questions that I don't think I had answers to, and I haven't had a chance to really dig in with Andrew on, say, Ruggles Lane. I know we brought up the public safety building a couple times in public meetings of various, so I'm just saying, this is what I know. Right now, the limiting factor with the Ruggles Lane for me was trying to figure out the appropriate means to finance something like that.
Don't we have an issue with space for the transfer stations and the electric grid in town anyways?
Oh,
Would that
yes,
affect the
that's
ability
another
to add
part.
anything in? Because they were talking about upgrading the substation, and that would already be filled if they upgraded, I believe. I think that's already.
Let's just say they upgraded the substation. It still doesn't mean that the circuit from that school going to the substation doesn't need to be rewired.
Right.
And that can run, depending on how many miles, I mean, it could be $200,000 to rerun that from there to the substation and back, depending on what's required. Because sometimes you can replace the wires, but it's not just the wires now. Now you've got to actually change poles all the way down the way, and it's not always something that we have a say in. National Grid
National
just
Grid
comes
says
back
no.
and says, this is what we have to do. If you want to do it, this is what it's going to cost. Done. You're not negotiating the scope of work. It's just, you want to connect. And at that point, you've already invested money to get to that point. Because someone's paying for the initial design, someone's paying for the application fee, and then once they say this is what it's gonna cost, you've gotta decide then, you're all in or you're not. So, what I'm suggesting is it makes it harder to get someone to wanna jump into a lease or power purchase agreement in
If
this
this
town
were-
right now, because their revenues and costs are unknown. And so it's hard for us to advertise something like that, knowing that our landscape it's just a very difficult landscape right now. Barre, I think, in National Grid's territory is the first, if not the second most saturated grid system in what it can handle versus what's on it right now, when it comes to solar.
And all the outages we just had with all these limbs down and trees and issues out here probably make them wonder if they want to invest in more solar out here if they're gonna keep having this type of trouble with the higher volume of demand coming out of here. There was a lot of incidents. There's gotta be more coming. There's still a lot of trees.
I only
leaning.
lost power 3 times this last week. So I don't know what you're talking about. That's not that bad.
And I hate to tell you, I'm at the switching pole, so you guys lost it, I kept it.
You lost it at least once, right? Because I thought it made it up to School Street, or do you
For
actually?
partial, I'm at the pole, yeah, Joe loses it next door to me, and the firehouse loses it, and then I keep it.
Oh, okay, so you were right at the.
I
okay, wasn't
believe-
sure.
I
Sorry, this
believe
doesn't
I
matter to
actually-
You guys.
I believe I'm actually between the two circuits, and so if Uptown loses it, I also keep it.
Oh, I got
I
you.
think my line comes off of in between the switching.
So you kind of get
I
either
think.
or.
When they both go, I lose it, but it's very rare I lose it, I'm just in a lucky place.
Actually, historically, I've been lucky because it seemed like every time I heard power outage, it was around Union Street, Pleasant Street, in that neighborhood. So I can't complain that it hit me 3 times this week.
And when it
But
hits you,
moving
it hits
on.
Hubbardston, almost completely.
The question came up about the solar and investments and all of that. Anything more you want to talk about, Sam, bring up on that?
Other than, I remember Andrew wrote a letter some time ago. He said the only thing that he would consider right now is, and that was several months ago, is having an RFP on the public safety building regarding solar. And that building, unless I was given the wrong information, still costs us $30,000 a year for electricity. To support all the costs.
Yeah.
So that could be a possible request for proposal.
And we probably wouldn't pipe much into the grid from there, we'd probably.
Excuse me?
No, it's not so much piping into the grid, it's offsetting what you're pulling from the grid. You're actually,
Right.
with a site like that, what you're really trying to do is use your own solar.
Right,
So you don't
once-
have to pay National Grid for that 30,000.
I'm saying we wouldn't impact the substation, it wouldn't be such an issue.
No, they will make you upgrade as if there's no building there. Because if you shut your building down for a couple days, their grid has to be able to handle that output. So they're not going to
Well, you
look
can-
at it the way you're
You
saying.
can shut the solar down if you shut
As
the
far as
building
I
down.
understand.
You can usually disconnect the solar, de-energize the field and shut it
You
off.
can, but I have not seen them get into what I would call specialized agreements with customers. A specialized agreement would mean that National Grid would agree that you would shut that down if you're not gonna use the electric. And unless we added batteries, because they're creating kind of some new programs with battery control where they can kind of control the battery,
It'd be hard to be independent from
I
it.
think, generally, you're still gonna have to deal with the infrastructure upgrade to a certain amount. I mean, they charge us
must be a way to
$25,000
unplug.
just to add in 2 poles to connect the
There
building.
must be a way to unplug and draw off it only and use National Grid as a backup. Well, we do not feed into them, but we disconnect otherwise, just, but without regards to them. You must certainly be able to purchase solar, put it on your own facility and have it a standalone facility, off-grid literally. So if you treated the building that way, off-grid literally, then augmented by taking some electricity in without ever feeding back.
You might, if you have the right electrical engineer, write
But-
it out
but
to
that may-
show that
that
it's
may
an
get
automatic
pricey.
transfer switch of some sort that says,
And it's a one-way feed. That would be something worth looking into if we're gonna look at it, because $30,000 is still a lot of electricity
I
for.
think Grid looks at like small generators as anything less than 250 kilowatts, so.
25.
or, Sorry, 25. So, I'm not sure what size system we're talking about putting on that, but it might fall under a small generation. I just know that to put the one, we didn't have to do any upgrades for the one on the DPW building, but that cost was around $200,000 to install that system. So, that's probably the same scale that we're looking at for this type, but I'd have to defer to somebody to do a full analysis on it.
what I think we need to do is we need to look at this being an RFP that is much more, let's say, like a DSB type thing, not a flat fee sealed bid that regard, but more of a qualifications, proposals, and here are the three options. We want our purchase agreement recommendation, a lease recommendation, and, maybe an owner purchased. And they've gotta explain in that, see if maybe you can look into that. And I'm open to calling out more than one site, or saying, provide us the proposal for this. Two other sites may be expanded upon based on an approved bidder.
Right. I think the key
Well,
is
then
gonna be
you can
And then you
defining-
just gotta put it in the RFP, or you can't go back to it later without going back to
You could go back to
RFP.
looking at Ruggles at a site like that, but once again, like you said, if it goes into saving the school money and us money, it's kind of a fruitless game.
The key is gonna be behind the meter, staying behind the meter on all this. I think that's the way we're gonna, I think that's the only way we're gonna be able to move forward without tying into the,
Right.
you know, the grid system and fully backfeeding to the point where they're gonna tell us that we're gonna need to upgrade
Yeah.
the three-phase to a 45-foot poles all the way back to the substation.
But I think there's enough
Right.
usage there that's gonna be beneficial at the public safety building, I would think.
And there's a couple things we could look at in regards to battery power. And it depends on how much space you have, or how many batteries could you actually install. Like, what's your footprint could you do? Because battery power can also end up being something that's, in lieu of a gas or oil-fired generator. It can be your backup power, depending on how you plan it, wire it, and
Do
set
you
it
have a
up.
generator down there for the public safety?
We don't at the fire station, that was interesting.
But there you go. I mean, that's another thing. The problem with the fire station is you got the houses and the trees on the south side, if I'm correct.
How much you willing to invest in that building?
Well, that's the thing, it was just interesting.
No, I mean, if we're building a new building.
Right, oh, I know,
Right.
but, you know,
Is
if you
that
put a
something you
second
consider?
story on.
Oh, you'd wanna have it in a new building, it's, when the power dropped and they had to get the trucks out, they had to go up and disconnect. You pull the quick disconnect of the automatic door, but the arm falls down far enough that it'll contact the truck if you open the door. Luckily, somebody saw that before they put a hole in the new engine for. So they had to actually get up to the ladder and disconnect the bracket off the door so they could open the door. Then you had to do that for each of the doors to get the trucks out, so. I talked to Bob about maybe trying to rig it so the arms only fall so far, as long as they get out of the track, and, but initially they weren't set up that way. Yeah, then of course, the way to charge things or.
So these are just a
else.
variety of things. But I do think we should look at starting to draft something like that. At least get it on the street, listen to the different bidders. In the process,
Wanna
we
say
need
that
to
in the
pull
form
in
of
some
a
people
motion?
that'll be that DSB review board type people that would go through the interviews with the bidders.
don't you
So
put that in a
consider, right now I'm just throwing it out and then we
So-
can determine what
yeah,
motion, but these
well,
are
I'm
just
saying-
things that,
No, I like that idea,
Different
getting,
pieces
looking
that
at
would
a
be
couple different
involved.
ways, get some input recommendations and a couple of different methods. You'd know better than I what those methods would be, this is what you're more involved in. But make a motion with a couple different methods and let's approve it and move forward
Get it together.
and start moving on this one.
second.
I'm totally lost.
Okay.
Did you even vote on the investment? I could have,
No, we'll get right back to the investment
Okay.
after. I know what you mean, this was a complete sidetrack that had really nothing to do with investment policy.
Shiny squirrel, we call it.
This is a capital investment more than an investment policy. But the motion was to develop a draft RFP based on our conversation this evening, correct?
Yes.
We have a second. I'd like to call for a vote.
Aye.
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 Work on it, throw it back and forth as you, whatever, and we'll get it in front of the board again and see what we can do.
And I had made the motion to approve the investment side of this.
Oh, it was
did.
discussion that led to this.
Right, we
Right.
had a
See it
motion and a
as-
second, we had
All
discussion.
right.
So we were just
Dylan
waiting,
second.
we were just waiting on the vote.
So now we're back to any further discussion on the investment policy? No? Call for a vote on accepting the investment policy.
Aye.
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 All right.
Neat circle.
That was the hard part, everybody go home. Okay, next item on the list, I'll admit I'm not prepared for it, but the special events bylaw, I know it keeps coming up and we gotta do it, but.
Well, we were waiting to see if we had any input or comment on it from people, is where we were at. Last week, we had none, and like we said, it didn't need to hit till town meeting, so we don't need to move on it, so it's not like you're behind on it.
Right, I just.
We had said that we're gonna wait and see if we have input. If we have it, we'll discuss it. If we're not, we'll kick it back on and off. And so I don't know if there's any input.
I haven't received anything on special events bylaw, any input myself. You haven't received anything from, okay. Let's just make sure that the general public out there does know that if you're interested in any potential special events bylaw that's gonna get drafted and go before the town for vote, we are asking for your input, so write it, email it, or just show up and provide some comments and discussion. You can get a copy of the draft through the town administrator's office if you're curious what's currently being reviewed, and you can provide comment from there.
It's on the town website too.
It's also on the town website for those that use the web.
It's been about a month now. I suppose we kick it around, let it stay open, and maybe the first meeting in December, we'll vote to accept it and get it ready for the town meeting if no one has any comments by then, so we don't leave it open forever. But I'd like to leave it open for a couple more meetings, and maybe the first meeting in December, we'll make a vote on it and get it adopted. Sam's got something.
Yes, Sam?
I was under the impression that the planning board had some discussions in their, one of their last meetings regarding special events. There's
They
nobody-
did?
There's nobody here from planning, but I was sitting there listening. I thought that they had some discussions. Maybe you need to bring, ask the folks from the planning to come in and discuss that with you before, because there's no input from anybody here. And I wasn't in planning. I happened to be sitting, listening, probably the same time you were.
I will speak to them and see if they're interested in participating in this discussion. I will invite them. You guys are okay with that, right?
Absolutely.
Yep, of course.
Okay. I do plan on, unless life pulls me in more directions than I anticipate, I do plan on being at the planning board meeting tomorrow night. So we'll talk to them at the meeting and let them know that this is one of the items that we're discussing and they are invited to participate. Next item, economic development plan review. Where are you guys at with this? Would you like a little more time to review it? Because I know it's,
It just hit our table tonight, so, in this form. I just thumbed through it a little bit, but
I think it's nice. It's got a lot of good information and data in it. Again, I agree, I gotta review more of that information. But I think CMRPC did a good job kind of gathering our data, bringing it together into this plan to help us look at. I mean, this built off of previous things CMRPC has been doing, not only with Barre, but our 5-town regional school district. And it's continued to grow, and this is one of the products of that effort. It's also the thing that helped lead us into the South Barre Neighborhood Review. I think that's is that a grant or something we already approved to move forward?
Yeah, so that was a grant that was, that we were part of, but that is basically almost like a part 2 to this, which is specifically focused directly on that area.
Yeah.
This is kind of like the intro, and then that's kind of like chapter 1, so.
And I'm not saying it's gonna be identical, but what I see here is this is a similar step as to what years ago and now we're living is the upgraded common up here. You know, getting this information leads to the information necessary to get grant funding and continue design work and make your design fit the neighborhood. So how many people are living there? How many people could live there? You know, what do you have? What's the future development? What's the future plans with the planning board and how they may or may not revise zoning? Things like that, that will all play into this and how they wanna kinda like finish the concept of redoing Main Street and Vernon and Southbury and where they all meet. This work by CMRPC, the Economic Development Strategic Plan, and then the Southbury Neighborhood, I forget what specifically it's called, will help us be able to move into the next steps of funding, designing, and planning how we want to kind of upgrade that, similarly what we did in the common up here. I'm not going to say it has the same historical concern of horse races running over little kids, but it needs an upgrade. So we're going to do what we can to see if we can find a way to help that out. That's I don't mean to say that as if I'm speaking for the board, because that's not what I meant when I said we're gonna do what we can. I just meant more, that's how I see the intent of this. Any further discussions on this? Thoughts, comments at this stage? No. Okay. New business. Letter requesting land donation to Felton Field. We did receive a letter from Janice Brown and Barbara Duane regarding approximately 3-acre parcel of land that, well, I'll read it and we'll go from there. To Barre Selection. This is a letter of intent to donate 3-acre parcel of land on Old Cold Brook Road to Barre 4-H. This ID is EA Lot 12 Parcel 2. We have been in touch with the 4-H and they agreed to the transaction. We would like to make the donation in memory of Dennis W. Brown. How do we go about this donation? Yours truly, Janice Brown and Barbara Duane. I do believe on further review, the reference to 4-H intent meant the Felton Field Commission. So they've started discussion with them to donate to the Felton Field, and working together with that. So that lays it out. I don't have a plot plan that I'm looking at right now to tell the public the land is on the north side, the east side, the west side, or whatever of Felton Field at the moment, but
Yeah, so I was gonna come up with a list of things that they'll have to provide further to you, and then hopefully schedule for a future meeting for them to come in and explain why they want to make a donation.
yeah.
If it's continuous to Felton Field?
That's my understanding, is that it is.
Now, I don't think the Felton Field Commission is in a position to receive land on behalf of the town of Barre. I think we are.
No, the town is.
The town is.
At town
At
meeting.
town meeting,
Right.
so we could recommend that.
So it's a recommendation that I think
But if their
starts
intent,
with them to come to us to,
if their
yeah.
intent is to donate it to 4-H, is there a 4-H club in town specifically that may want to receive that land? Not the-
That's
not
why
the
I
town.
believe the
Before we
markup
just
saying
assume.
Felton Field was,
I was initially approached by Margot Petricohen about
Mhm.
this from Felton Field, so I believe that it was just a miscategorization, but that's why I need to provide a letter back
like
to
to
them
check with
to
them.
ensure that,
Because if their intent
This
is to
is-
give this to 4-H, then.
right, and that's
then
why I wanna
by
say
all
that
means-
this is the additional
not a
documentation.
public issue.
Right, and for 4-H to have a piece of land abutting Felton Field may help 4-H itself with function things. Maybe they put a building there instead of on town land. Maybe they may be more likely to build something, like they've talked about possibly doing. If they had the 3 acres of land, then 4-H might invest in that.
Right, and that's why I figured that if we can get some additional information, then bring them in to explain to you guys what their true intent is, we can go from there.
Yep. So the only reason I kind of brought up for more than just that is just double checking the kind of the things we would want to make sure we know and what, so historically, what's the history of that land? We need to worry about some old farmer that used to recycle his oil all the time, and then 100-gallon oil thing spilled out and nobody mentioned it, and trash, old farmer, it used to be his metal bin where every tractor that died out in the field. I mean, things like that, so we need to kind of make sure those things are what we're looking at, whether it means we should be reaching out to Conservation Commission to see if they don't mind taking a look at the property to give us a little input on, should we be asking for more things because we see this, we recognize that. I'm just throwing things out, listen, but I don't wanna start and say, hey, we need this, and then go back to them and say, and we need this, this, and this.
I think first let's make sure if they do intend it to be for 4-H, then we don't have to do any of that. Get them in touch with 4-H and help them. Be glad to help them with the process. But I think it'll be a good, like I said, I've encouraged 4-H coming. You know, if they own something here other than just borrowed some land, that might be good. So maybe if there's not a Barre 4-H, maybe 4-H in general, the Worcester County would accept it, if that's their intent. And then they would maintain the land, they would, you know, build on it if they wish, and it wouldn't have to go through the whole process of the town. For example, if they decide they want to build a show arena or something, they could do it in 3 acres of land pretty easily without having to come to us and build it on our land and get all the approvals and everything else.
Okay.
You know, I think it would be more beneficial for 4-H and for the people if it was owned privately in a club, if that's their intent of it as well.
Gotcha.
We have Felton Field, and we go way more than 3 acres down there. So it's not a huge addition to Felton Field, but it would be a substantial thing for 4-H to own a piece there.
I got you, I was just trying to, like, if
Yeah, I know,
they did
but
wanna
if-
give it to
but
the
if it is
town,
given to
what
the town,
would you
then
want to know?
Absolutely, which we've
Because
done
there's
before.
no reason for him to have to wait for us to meet again,
And
to
we've
say,
done that
yeah,
before.
they do, and now what do we want?
We've accepted some and backed off on some in the last couple of years because of those issues.
Exactly, so we just wanna make sure, obviously, we wanna know if there's anything regarding existing deeded right-of-ways. These are just things that pop up after, you say, yeah, that's great, and you find out that National Grid has some right-of-way that can go right down the middle of your 3 acres and you really have no land to use. I don't know. So obviously, we probably should bring town council of some sort into the review of the parcel and that type of conversation. Look into that, because
clarify their
this
intent first,
particular
and then-
town council also has a very strong connection to 4-H.
Yes, he
And you may
does.
wanna say, I just don't wanna get involved, because I recognize it could just be a perception issue. Jim's been great, so I know he's also the type that will literally come to you and say, here's my conflict of interest forms, and here's the reason I'm not gonna get involved, so. Do you have any thoughts?
We should clarify first, just like we've been discussing.
Any further comment? If you don't mind getting those questions and kind of cleaning that up a little bit, and
No
we'll
problem.
revisit when they're ready.
Yeah.
Wage authorization, building commissioner, Andrew.
Yep.
What do you have to say?
This is just a cleanup from when we did the batch approvals at the beginning of the fiscal, or at the beginning of the fiscal year. This one kind of slipped through. We gave the 2% increase, but we had added the clause in the regional building commissioner agreement to make that a salary position. Doesn't change the amount that we're funding, it's just going from that straight hourly to salary. So we had just noted it as we were going through that it was still being tracked at an hourly rate, so we're just looking to change that internally, but needs the wage authorization to do that.
So this doesn't reflect a change in the pay, just defining it as a salary as opposed to
Correct.
hourly.
And it's the same rate that we had approved at town meeting, so, and have written into the agreement.
This is our current step? That's
Yep.
not a change in step at this point?
Current stuff.
I have no other questions.
No questions.
Two things. Do we also need to review the classification plan to make sure that this position is identified as salary versus hourly?
We had actually
And do we
upgraded
need to
in the
revise the
classification.
job description?
We had upgraded it in the classification plan. The only thing that we missed was that when we did the 100 wage authorization, turnovers at the end of the fiscal year as a batch, this one went from a hourly to a salary, and that was just not put in correctly. So that's really all that we're changing.
Okay. So job description also, same thing?
Job
Job-
description is correct or not
Job
correct?
job description, it states salary because that was something that we amended with the regional agreement.
Okay. Then I have no further questions. I just wanted to make sure we were just getting all the i's dotted
Yeah.
and t's crossed.
It was one of
A
those
lot
things
of
that I did
times
that
there's
50
too many
times.
parts that relate to the same thing that you just
Yeah.
miss updating one and not the other.
And that's how I
And that
missed
is-
this
And that's
part.
why it's here.
Yeah.
All right, motion to approve wage authorization, Class 8, Step 3 for Brianna, at $63,705.
Second.
Any further discussion?
I just put a line in. I must have accidentally deleted it when I put the comment on the bottom.
I was like, I don't exist. Call for vote?
Aye.
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 Selectmen report thing, we had an email this morning, I forgot the subject matter of it, that we said, maybe we'll talk about selectmen report.
That, the request for proposals on the environmental trust grant that I discussed with you before.
So yeah, I'd have to say that that really isn't something that, it was a grant that isn't applicable to anything the town is currently ready for. It's one of those, you need a full design and implementation plan and 50% of the money, and, oh, by the way, it has to deal with waterways, or, when I read the title of the grant, it made it sound like, oh, we could use that to work on the, town land up on Town Farm Road, if we wanted to help fund upgrading those trails, because the general topic, what did it say?
Environmental trust grant.
And the description about it was revitalizing ecosystems or something, so you're trying to bring something back to what it was, because historically man has done something to this site and ruined it.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Then
pretty.
he read through the whole link and it was like, no, this is only like if you're trying to help sea turtles or other aquatic something or another's.
Yeah. Marine
So-
habitats and aquatic and ecological systems.
So, needless to say, we're not ready for that. Any other selectmen have anything to discuss?
Just to update, my stripper attempts with the warm has produced nothing with my mild strippers. The non-toxic, biodegradable, friendly strippers will not work. So I'm gonna have to move to the lye-based, not fun ones. It won't be done, like I said, won't be done to warm weather either way, but it's gonna be one of those. There's two different ones. One is a gel, which you spray a brush on, and for overhead, you use a paste. It's almost like spackling, like joint compound. You trowel it on, it will penetrate through and come off with the paint attached to it. Pretty easy and clean to take it off. It's just, the application of the gel-based one is, you gotta be careful. Treat it with gloves on, literally. Gloves, goggles, and the full suit. It's just nasty stuff, but that stuff I know will take it off.
Folks listening might not know what you're referring to.
The testing the handrail for stripping paint in regards to refinishing the bandstand. In the spring, I want to strip the bandstand. I'm trying to determine which stripper will work the best. And there's several non-toxic biodegradable options which I've tried, which are not effective for this case. So they don't work in all all situations, always different paints. Whether they're lead-based oil, straight oil-based, latex-based, urethane reinforced, there's a lot of different things and how the layers are formed. Sometimes it goes right through it, and sometimes it just doesn't, and it wouldn't move the railing. It just wouldn't do it. So, it's not gonna be the good ones, it's gonna be one of the nastier ones to use, which is not as much fun. But I'll still get it done in the spring. We'll,
Thank you.
We'll figure out what the stripper cost would be, let the town buy a stripper, of course, but I'll gladly donate my time and do it. But this stuff is, probably someplace $50 or $60 a gallon. We're probably looking at 10 gallons, so it's not a huge expense. To have it stripped for, you know, under $1,000 won't be bad, whereas if you hired a company, it would be
Right.
substantial. And it'll be ready for paint, but that'll be in the spring, so. You know, we'll focus on putting the handrail back together, and hopefully, 2 or 3 weeks, I'll just get that done and put it back in.
Thank you. Do you have,
Tighten up the other rails as I get time, just go to them one at a time.
do you have anything in the town administrator's thing that,
It was pretty brief. So.
Yes, it was.
Mary Jane?
Yes, at one of the meetings, it was mentioned that my neighbors complained about debris and, the word came up, junk in my yard. My name was mentioned, Trafalgar Square was mentioned. I was not here. Who were the neighbors that sent Mr. O'Sullivan up to my house to bring this to the television?
I don't know.
You were up there, you said that the neighbors complained about Trafalgar, Mary Jane, my name, debris and
I
junk.
said in the letters we had those complaints from people. I didn't say anyone sent me up there. I said I took the opportunity when I was home one day to drive around, and that's when I saw how far it was from the basketball hoops up on School Street down to the park. It was a short
Absolutely.
distance, and just drove around.
But I wasn't here to say anything. I do shovel the street, I do rake the street, I did sweep the street, and as far as I can see, I haven't changed anything. Is there a problem on my property?
Nobody's provided a complaint to me,
We've had
so
any complaint?
Okay,
I'm
well,
not saying,
no.
I've heard no complaint from anybody directly about anything going on your property. So,
Well, I'm here, so if there's a problem, I will tell you what I think. I wasn't here when it was mentioned,
understood.
and I did the same thing tonight.
Well, other people weren't here when you mentioned their names tonight. So it
And
does
I
happen
wasn't
at
here,
times.
And I wasn't here.
Oh, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying it happens. I'm not even trying to judge right or wrong.
But thank you for sticking up for me, anyway.
You're welcome.
So if it's, they can do it to me. That was the Barre Gazette business. That is public stuff. These letters, I didn't even know about, I had asked about them. I didn't have anything at all, these surveys or these polls, I didn't get one. But they arrived through the selectman's office or the Mr. Gold.
We had just put out a general statement, I believe, at the time that led to people submitting those letters, asking if anybody wanted to provide something in writing about what was going on. And it was done on the table. I don't think it was an official, we sent the statement and asked people to go chase. But then in response, we received these letters from various people.
That
Some of
was-
them were anonymous, I think, and some of them weren't.
That was at the meeting that Mary Jane was at when she brought us the copy of when the land that for Nornay Park was donated and the contingencies for the donation. It was during that meeting, the conversation, that we suggested that, I'd suggested that if you brought in people from your neighborhood that would support you, we'd have more than one voice. And that's what we posted out of the meeting, that if people would like to share their comments, you had indicated specifically that people would have fear of retribution, so they wouldn't want to come comment, and we suggested they could make the comments anonymously. That was a full discussion that happened that night that led to those letters. Then over the next 2 weeks, we had all those letters come in.
Well, of course, we're not gonna have anybody that doesn't have the basketball hoop in front of their house no one's gonna complain because they're very happy that it's not in front of their house, so to fill that out, how are you gonna fill that out? Unless you absolutely love basketball. They're happy it's not gonna be on Nelson, it's.
There was nothing to fill out. There was an open invitation to
I
write us.
understand. your-
They filled out, yes, there were two sentences on the top,
No. The-
and they filled out that survey.
Maybe somebody else sent a survey around?
No, I think we're getting a little confused between one or the
It's the
other.
packet that I gave you.
Yes, it is, but that was your survey you created, right, that you're talking
There's
about?
one in the middle, and it says the survey that they were to fill out. There's 10 pages, I believe. One of them was an empty copy, and I wrote over it.
I don't believe our board put a survey out, did
We
we?
did not put a survey out.
This board did not put out a survey. So the town did not put out a survey, so I don't know.
How did...
So we can't speak to what you're talking about if it
How did
wasn't.
this kick the ante happen that caused all this trouble down on my street?
I don't know what you're
Because
talking about
as
once
soon as
again.
that happened, the flurry of people and all the grilling and cooking and all these letters, they had the same words inside, railroad tracks, evil woman, evil woman. They were in a group, and they wrote these letters.
I can give
Perhaps they
you,
were.
I got one more thing to say on this, and the only reason is because I don't think speaking about it in the public meeting is helping you. It sounds like you're saying certain things may or may not have escalated on your street based on the timing of when some of this came out, correct?
Absolutely it did. I took the letters that were handed to me from the board, and I went to each of these people and asked, did you write this about me? Why? And explain it. Did you write this about me? And I went to all of them. Oh, well, they said. Not that they knew. It said, and that's how the cancer spreads of smears.
You are correct,
Well, that's what's happened.
but you asked why.
What, why to what?
If I'm correct, you asked what started this, isn't that what you just asked?
Oh, 3.5 years ago.
No, I mean the recent. You said what started the recent escalation? The recent discussion in public meetings has aggravated both sides of the fence. And I think that is added to some of the potential more heated conversations or feelings people have right now. It's just my thoughts. I'm not saying I'm right. Because right now, kind of like you're saying, both sides now start to feel a little bit of, well, they're saying this about me in a public meeting. They're saying, the other one's saying, well, I wasn't there. And then now, somebody writes something in the writing, but you weren't here, so when it gets discussed, now you weren't able to defend yourself. So this isn't really the right forum, and I think it's just exacerbating the issue right now. It's not helping you or your neighbors. It's just kind of getting people more angry. That's just what I think. I'm not saying I'm right, but I haven't seen it help. One last thing, Mary Jane.
From you.
Oh, I thought you had something to say. I was saying one more thing.
No, I just listened to the interview, but I want to say that my name was on these written letters. My name was written there. It wasn't this person or this, that. It was my name with, she killed cats. She's putting antifreeze out. All these comments and these smears and these writings.
Well-
Is that fair?
No,
read it,
honestly,
read it.
and I'll be honest, I did not read through those and take every word I heard as using a slang. Like, I didn't take it as the gospel. I didn't take it as that is the ultimate truth, because I recognize, first of all, I wasn't there. So I'm not just gonna assume because one person says it happens, or even a couple letters say it, that happened, or that they even truly understood why they're saying it. In other words, maybe somebody told them back in the day, you did do it. And they're just stuck with that memory, but they never followed up. So they're not outright trying to lie, they just never followed up when they were told to lie in the first place. I don't know. It's a long story. I don't have all the, so all I was getting at was, the more we talk about it, the worse it's gonna get right now. In this meeting. It's not gonna help you.
I agree.
So that's all. Doesn't mean there aren't other ways. I just don't think it's gonna help in this meeting.
Yes, oh, there are other ways, I just don't want to go there.
Well,
I don't want to.
I don't even wanna insinuate what those ways are. That's just gonna get someone in trouble. I think the conversation's over.
Motion to
I'm
adjourn.
talking about a lawyer, I'm not talking about hurting these people in any way, so don't start that.
Mary
That was
Jane, I
motion to
didn't
adjourn.
mean that.
Well,
You made a motion?
I did.
Yes, he did.
I second Mr. O'Sullivan's motion.
Call for, we're in the middle of a motion.
Well, I think you were a little premature, is that there was a discussion.
First of all, this wasn't even public comment. We already went through
No,
that.
but
This
there
is
was
not an
a-
agenda item.
No, but there was discussions going on between the chair and between a citizen, and I think it was a little impolite for a selectman to butt in order to stop the motion, in order to stop the conversation, and make a motion when there was some conversation. And I think there was a little, excuse me, Greg, I think it was a little impolite. This young lady has been aggrieved by certain situations, and I understand we all want to go home. We all have a busy day tomorrow, but
That's not why we're trying to end this conversation,
But-
Sam.
to make a motion,
Motion
when there was
stands.
discussion going on, I think it was a little impolite, that's all. That's all I'm saying.
So noted.
Thank you.
Call for vote?
Aye.
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 Point I'm trying to get at, I've already